BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Okay, once again, most of you will probably be listening to this on Tuesday, and Zodiac Tuesday is almost turning into a thing. I apologize for not putting out the episode on Monday morning like I normally do. I was just a little bit under the weather, so I'm not sure if this is going to be a short episode or a long episode. I'm just going to start and let's see how it goes. But everybody I know has been sick at some point over the last 3 weeks, especially around Christmas time, and I think that it was just finally my time to deal with it. The last 24 hours were a little bit brutal, but, it just kind of comes in and comes out. And also, I would like to say a big thank you to everyone who listened to the most recent episodes about Jack the Ripper and D.B. Cooper, Ripper Wednesday and Cooper Friday, here on Black Box Online Radio. The schedule for Black Box Online Radio really got mixed up during the month of December, but because last week's Zodiac Monday came out on a Tuesday, and this week's Zodiac Monday came out on a Tuesday, we had episodes on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. So firstly, Happy New Year to you all, and at the end of the episode I will be talking about some future developments for Black Box Online Radio and the company that this will be part of, Switchforce Media. I am your host, Black Box Ned. Let's get started. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer that operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. Not only was the Zodiac Killer a serial killer, but he also wrote letters, ciphers, created bomb diagrams, and greeting cards that shared taunting messages as well as threatening messages to the public. The Zodiac was a domestic terrorist in addition to being a serial killer. And the first thing that I have for you here on the Zodiac Killer News Report comes to us from Vincent McConnell. This is something that he shared on his Facebook page. Vincent McConnell is the host of New Cokes 2024, and he made an effort to combine the Zodiac Killer's Presidio Heights sketch with the Lake Berryessa voyeur sketch. On September 27th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer attacked Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, where he wore his hooded costume. But earlier in the day, there was a man who was seen watching 3 girls in a very suspicious way. He has since been referred to as the Lake Berryessa voyeur. Then about 2 weeks after that, on October 11th of 1969, we had the murder of Paul Stein, the Zodiac's final confirmed murder. And that gives us the even more famous composite sketch, the one with the crew cut and the glasses. And I think that these two sketches look very, very different. And I think one of the more obvious elephant in the room examples of this is that the Zodiac's, or I should just say the Lake Berryessa voyeur has very dark hair. He also has a more rectangular face, and he is not wearing glasses. Those are just some of the things that immediately jump out. And he also has his hair parted in a very particular way, whereas the Presidio Heights composite features a man in a crew cut, and he also seems to have a very pointed chin and a pointed jawline as opposed to a rectangular face. But what Vincent McConnell did was he tried to make his own artist rendition of combining these two composites together, and this is going to begin with a challenge question. What do you think about this? Is this the person that we should be looking for? This combination of the Lake Berryessa voyeur and the Presidio Heights sketch? I think that my immediate takeaways from this is that this person looks extremely old, and when I look at almost all colorized composites of the Zodiac Killer's composite sketches, I think we're dealing with someone who is much older than their 20s. I mean, at 30s at least, possibly into the 40s, but that is purely based on the composite sketches. Once again, thank you to Vincent McConnell for sharing this with me, and I would love to know your responses. Now, the next one that we have here comes to us from DNA King. DNA King is a longtime follower of Black Box Online Radio, and he sent an email to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And DNA King says, I'm considering filing public records litigation to force the release of all investigative files concerning Zodiac from all of the investigative agencies. Do you have any thoughts about that? Feel free to discuss this on Black Box Online Radio. Well, thank you, DNA King, for sending me that. And once again, anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. What do I think about this? I think it's an excellent idea because over the years, I learned that there's a very big misconception out there, and that is that the entirety of not only the Zodiac case file, but all related case files have been made available to the general public. And I think that that is just completely untrue. I think there are a lot of documents that we haven't seen. And not to mention, as DNA King points out very clearly right here, we also have interlocking agencies. We also have separate agencies. We have more than one investigative body that is following the Zodiac Killer mystery. And when you break it down, it seems rather obvious, right? You of course would have the FBI, but you would also have SFPD, VPD, and how about something like the Riverside Police? So a lot of this stuff has been made available to the public, but I do not believe for a second that all of the case files, plural, have been made available. I think that this is a very good point to explore. And DNA King is somebody who contacted the show in the past talking about a different type of Zodiac Killer suspect named Michael Zlackett. And I've looked into Michael Zlackett in the past, and as you guys know, I'm not overly convinced that he was the Zodiac Killer. If anything, I think that he was a better suspect for the Bates Had to Die letters. In 1966, Sherry Jo Bates was murdered in Riverside, California, hence the reference to the Riverside Police Department that I just brought up. But about 6 months after her murder, there were 3 letters that were mailed from somebody who claimed to have been her killer, or just at the very least saying, Bates had to die, there will be more, and the letters were signed with some type of calligraphic Z. And one person who may have been the person who fabricated that was Michael Zlackett. I think he's a very interesting suspect for that. But there is a post that is written about Michael Zlackett over on Tappa Talk, and I would like to read some of this stuff here. This is written by Book Collector. Here is some information about Zlackett. Parts are probably exaggerated or just incorrect, but enough people have investigated him, and they can say that his innocence has been established. Well, I would love to know some supporting reasons for that. Even though I'm not overly convinced that he was the Zodiac Killer, I would love to know the reasons why his innocence was established. Viewing Zlackett as an early person framed by the Zodiac seems to be the best answer. Okay, well, I can share some additional information on that. Michael Zlackett was someone who allegedly or reportedly used the name Zodiac. He started calling himself Zodiac because he was trying to sound tough, and people actually began mocking him by calling him Big Bad Zod. And that became an unfortunate nickname that he was stuck with. Viewing Zlackett as an early person framed by the Zodiac seems to be the best answer. It is unfortunate that Zlackett has not been in the short summaries of the case, as he is quite important. I primarily accept that multiple Zodiac perpetrators, because of what Sandy Betts describes. I think that sentence is meant to say I primarily accept that there were multiple Zodiac perpetrators. There are other indications, though, such as the letter references, the SLA and the Manson family, and also a perfect crime is best done with multiple people. The Zodiac was probably a fan of Alfred Hitchcock. In the episode called Museum Piece, one of the characters had a flashlight taped to a gun. Okay, well, so many things going on in this post here on Tappa Talk. Well, firstly, though, somebody like Michael Zlackett, he used the word Zodiac in his life. He had this type of connection to one of the areas where the Bates Had to Die letters may have had some type of origin or connection, and that would be San Bernardino, California. But, I mean, as far as though just thinking that he was some type of accessory or accomplice based on that alone, or just even based on anybody's stories, whether it's Sandy Betts or anybody's personal stories, I mean, you're going to have to do a lot more than that. I mean, that's not even mental gymnastics at that point. That's almost just creativity. You're going to have to do a lot more than what's in that post to try and convince me that there were multiple perpetrators in the Zodiac Killer mystery. I'll come back to the first question. What do you think about this statement or this request or idea to try and use the law to get all of the case files released publicly, all of the documents that we have not had exposure to, and how many of them do you think there are? Do you think that we've just seen the tip of the iceberg with the Zodiac Killer case files, or do you think that we've seen almost everything there is and they're just like a few boxes of papers here and there? So I would love to know what you guys think about that, and you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. And one person who has been going through almost all of the documents about the Zodiac Killer's first confirmed crime, the Lake Herman Road murders, is Eddie McNamara, who has been a guest on this program previously, and Eddie has released a new book called Two Fair Zone. And this is a follow-up to Eddie's first book, Brooklyn Hardcore. And when Eddie was a guest on this program, we didn't talk about his books so much because they are fiction. We talked about the Zodiac Killer mystery. And Eddie is really trying to explore the possibility of how the Zodiac Killer did not commit the Lake Herman Road murders, the December 20th, 1968 murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. But Eddie has released this new book of fiction, and he says that he has a Zodiac Killer book already in the works. And the next thing that I have for you here on the Zodiac Killer News Report comes to us from Chad Burke. Chad Burke is somebody who runs the Zodiac Killer Facebook group, The Search for Zodiac, and Chad has spent an enormous amount of time trying to solve the Zodiac Killer Z13 cipher. But this segment here on Black Box Online Radio is going to focus on a possible Zodiac cipher, or I should say an unconfirmed cipher that some believe was written by the Zodiac Killer. And we're talking about the Scorpion ciphers that came in the early 1990s. In 1991, 5 ciphers were mailed to John Walsh of the TV show America's Most Wanted, and they have since been known and referred to as the Scorpion ciphers. And this is one that Chad Burke tried to solve. Chad Burke has been a guest on this program multiple times, and during our most recent interview, he talked about how he had a possible solution to the Scorpion cipher that he had written out, and he was just simply searching for it in his records. And he sent it to me, and I would like to read it off for you right now. And it says, "This is the Zodiac. I thought a trial determined guilt. Law tell to me a man to have a lawyer, a trial, and a last meal, as a judge sentences y'all. EJOS. 2 slain but slaves to Zodiac. If he goes, the game is over, but I can't face that." And when Chad sent that to me, it just looked like an absolute block of letters that I had to sort through. And that's the solution that I could see there. And yes, it is using coherent sentences. Mostly. And I think even Chad Burke would admit to this, because I follow his group, The Search for Zodiac, on Facebook, and in that group he talks about a lot of possible solutions to the Z13 that are not using the English language. He uses a lot of Greek and Arabic solutions, or, influences from those languages to try and solve the Zodiac Killer Z13 cipher. And a lot of them don't come out as just straight up English language words and sentences. But this solution to the Scorpion cipher is actually somewhat on point with that aspect of it. What do you think about this? Do you think this could be a solution to the Zodiac Killer Scorpion cipher, or I shouldn't say that, the Scorpion cipher? Because one thing that I have began to entertain a lot more over the recent months is the possibility that the Zodiac Killer did indeed write the Scorpion ciphers. It's something that I was never the biggest fan of in the past because, different handwriting, different types of methods, and even David Oranchak appeared on Black Box Online Radio and said that the Scorpion ciphers are difficult to solve because they just have a very high frequency of symbols. They're using an enormous amount of symbols, and when that is done, it's almost as if it's just more difficult to get a solution because one symbol could have so many possible meanings. And the Zodiac Killer of the 1960s, when he created the 408 cipher and the 340 cipher, clearly had some type of attempt at using coherent English language words. The 408 cipher, the one that says, "I like killing people because it's so much fun, it's even more fun than hunting wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all," that is one that is just a substitution cipher, so of course it's going to be following a certain amount of English language principles. And the Zodiac Killer's 340 cipher is also one that is going to be exploring also English language sentence structures that are fairly coherent. And Chad Burke's Scorpion cipher solution does have that. I'm going to read it again for you. "This is the Zodiac. I thought a trial determined guilt. Law tell to me a man to have a lawyer, a trial, a last meal, and a judge sentences y'all. EJOS, 2 slain but slaves to Zodiac. If he goes, the game is over, but I can't face that." Some of it is coherent, like, "Law tell to me a man to have a lawyer." I don't like that sentence particularly, because that almost seems like it's a solution that is working out mostly, but there are some rough edge things that almost seem forced into creating the particular solution. But "Law tell to me a man to have a lawyer, a trial, and a last meal as a judge sentences y'all." this is also some things that are rather bizarre. I'm from West Virginia, so we say the word y'all all the time. I mean, I'm not completely shocked by that. But the very next line just says EJOS if I've deciphered his his solution correctly, or if I've read his solution correctly. Well, what is that? I can't even think of an English language word that could be symbolizing. And this also might sound a little bit petty. This might sound like I'm nitpicking. But what do you make of this sentence? Two slain, but slaves to Zodiac. I mean, two slain, but slaves to Zodiac? The Zodiac Killer very clearly talked about slaves. The Zodiac Killer even went as far as to say that the whole reason why he was committing these crimes was because he wanted slaves in afterlife. He wanted to die and be reborn in paradise, and those whom he had killed would be his slaves. But the Zodiac murdered more than two people. Two slain, but slaves to Zodiac. Now, I think that maybe he could be, I mean, I'm just trying to be generous here. Maybe he could be referring to something else, that there were two specific victims that stood out to him in a different way. Or also it says two slain. Maybe he was talking about the attempted murders, the attempted murders of Brian Hartnell and Mike Mageau. I mean, I don't know why he would refer to them as slain, because they both survived, but it's true that the Zodiac Killer did have 5 confirmed murders in that 1-year time frame from December 20th of 1968 to October 11th of 1969. During that time, there are 5 confirmed murders and 2 attempted murders, and this could also be referring to something else in a completely different way. But what do you think about Chad Burke's attempted solution to the Scorpion cipher? And the next thing that I have for you here on the Zodiac Killer News Report is actually going to come to us from a different source, and that is the channel ASMR Horror. Now, when some people hear the term ASMR, they're just going to think about stuff that you would use to fall asleep. And about 3 years ago, these things were very popular in the true crime world. I've never been the biggest fan of them because, I mean, I just don't like to fall asleep to true crime content, even though I did have a big phase with that. When I was in my early 20s, I would just put on anything from YouTube to fall asleep, and I ended up using a lot of serial killer documentaries. There was no specific reason for that. It was just that I was watching the content, and I would just put on a random one if I wanted to fall asleep. But one time they did this very brutal reenactment, and it just woke me up to the sounds of women screaming and being stabbed, and I was just absolutely freaked out. You ever have those moments when you can experience something from the real world in your dreams, but you almost know that you're dreaming, but you know that it's still happening, like you can hear the screaming and so on, and, I mean, a very trippy experience. But I've never been the biggest fan of true crime ASMR because when I'm watching true crime content or listening to true crime content, I don't want to use it to fall asleep. I want to actually hear what people are saying. And I even created the podcast for sleep on my other YouTube channel, AstroPsych 400, because some people were saying that they use Black Box Online Radio to fall asleep at night. And I was like, oh, well, why don't we talk about something that is purely designed to help people fall asleep? And that was something that I did for a couple months, but that, of course, didn't last forever. So I decided to watch the Zodiac Killer episode from ASMR Horror, and overall it was a pretty good episode. And I noticed that they had one about Jack the Ripper, which I hope to watch and discuss on Ripper Wednesday. But you know that YouTube works on algorithms, and their Jack the Ripper episode had over 100,000 views. Their Zodiac Killer episode only had 727 at the time of this recording. I mean, I don't know why some things catch on and some things do not, but anyway, I'm going to play a very brief clip from this, and then I'm going to discuss it, and then I'm also going to share some other things from the entirety of this video from Horror ASMR. So here's an intro to their Zodiac Killer episode.
The story of the Zodiac Killer, one of the most infamous unsolved serial killer cases in American history, begins in the mid-20th century. To understand the origins of this mysterious figure, we must delve into the life and times of the man, or men, behind the mask, starting with his early life and family background. Early life and family background. The true identity of the Zodiac Killer remains unknown, which complicates the task of providing a detailed account of his early life. However, various theories and investigative insights suggest that the Zodiac might have been born between the late 1930s and early 1940s. This would place his formative years in the context of World War II and the post-war era, a time marked by significant social and economic changes in the United States. Possible origins. Some criminologists and amateur sleuths have speculated that the Zodiac Killer might have had a troubled childhood. This theory is often based on the pattern observed in many serial killers, who frequently experience early trauma or dysfunctional family dynamics. Potential candidates who fit the profile of the Zodiac include individuals who may have been raised in a strict or abusive household. This kind of upbringing can lead to deep-seated psychological issues that manifest in violent behaviors later in life. Educational background. It is hypothesized that the Zodiac had a higher-than-average intelligence. This assumption stems from his cryptic letters and ciphers sent to newspapers, which displayed a sophisticated understanding of codes and a flair for manipulation. If this is accurate, the Zodiac likely attended school and performed well academically, especially in subjects like mathematics and cryptography. He might have been an isolated or introverted student, often preferring solitary activities over social interactions. Military service. Another prevalent theory suggests that the Zodiac might have had a military background. This hypothesis is supported by his use of weapons and tactical prowess, indicating some level of formal training. During the mid-20th century, many young men were drafted or volunteered for military service. If the Zodiac served in the armed forces, it would explain his familiarity with firearms and potentially provide a timeline for his later activities.
And one more time, that was from the channel ASMR Horror, and their full video is almost 2 hours, and if you do listen to the whole thing, once again, it's designed to help people fall asleep, so there's some chunks of it that are repetitive. I don't think they use the same text verbatim, but it seemed like they were paraphrasing certain sections of it in a different way just to make it longer, because it's not necessarily trying to say, okay, here are a bunch of facts about the Zodiac Killer, or here are a bunch of observations. And I want to talk about some things that are shared in that video before I respond to what you heard in the clip, which is actually just about the first 2 minutes of ASMR Horror's video on the Zodiac. And firstly, there's a very big section in there that discusses psychological profiling, and it just asks the question, why does psychological profiling exist? And the first answer that they provided was, it's an attempt to try and look at the totality of crimes that have taken place, and to try and use what we can learn from other crimes to find out whether or not someone is exhibiting these behaviors. And if somebody matches that profile, then this person, more likely than not, is the killer. And you've heard me say some things like that here on Black Box Online Radio. What I frequently say is just that a psychological profile is an educated guess about what someone would be like. But they also wanted to share that additional element that there really is a lot of investigation that goes into psychological profiling. Like if you have 1,000 criminals and somebody who is going to go on to become a serial killer is exhibiting these traits, well, then you need to be looking for someone in their daily life that is also exhibiting these traits. And the stuff that you heard in that little clip there that was talking about how the Zodiac Killer may have had strict or abusive parents, okay, sure, I mean, yes, that's most likely true. I don't dispute that. It's just that's a very general statement that we often find with serial killer discussions and serial killer literature. Now, there is one point, though, that I do want to strongly challenge, and that is a statement that you heard in the small clip there, that the Zodiac Killer's use of multiple firearms indicates that he was somebody who had a military background. Now, I mean, it's quite possible that the Zodiac was indeed in the military, but I don't think the Zodiac's firearms suggest anything about his military service or military involvement. The Zodiac Killer used a .22 caliber firearm, a 9mm. It's possible that he carried a .45 at Lake Berryessa, which was identified by Brian Hartnell when he was shown different photos of guns, and the surviving victim said that he thought it looked like the .45. So the Zodiac Killer has different firearms. I think the only thing that suggests is that the Zodiac had access to different firearms. Now, we're dealing with 1969. This is the Vietnam era, it's really quite possible that the Zodiac did have military experience, and I mean, I don't deny that at all. It's just that the fact that he owned multiple firearms suggests that he served in the military. I do disagree with that point. Now, as we go through the video, there was a discussion on the archetypes of serial killers. And the word archetype is one that we use a lot in the English language. It comes up in a lot of discussions about psychology as well as literature, which are two of the most widely discussed aspects of the true crime world that I focus on here on Black Box Online Radio. But I often experience this where you become familiar with the definition of a word, but you can't always articulate it, and you can't always provide the nutshell version of what, like, something such as an archetype is. And I decided to just get it off of Google, and it says a typical example. And there's a very big section in the ASMR horror video about how the Zodiac becomes a 20th century archetype for a serial killer who would write codes. And they did some interesting comparisons among other serial killers from not only the true crime world, but also fictional ones. They compared the Zodiac Killer to John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown, as well as to the entirety of The Silence of the Lambs, which is written by Thomas Harris. And what I think is a little bit more interesting with Thomas Harris's books is that, of course, he created Hannibal Lecter, but the serial killer villain in The Silence of the Lambs is named Buffalo Bill, and he is based on Ed Gein to a certain extent. And I think that those observations and just that type of psychological discussion on Ed Gein is really a little bit more fascinating to explore. But with the Zodiac Killer as being this typical example of a serial killer that created the codes and ciphers because he wanted to try and share some type of message to the public. And I think that it's done in just a narcissistic way where he is stating that I know the truth and you don't, I'm smart and you're not, I created something that you can't even figure out on your own, and also demonstrating that he had power over the public. Really, really, so much of what the Zodiac Killer is doing is focused on power. And if anything, this is a bigger reason to suggest that the Zodiac Killer was in the military, because having exposure to codes, learning about code practices in the military would be a little bit of a stronger point compared to this whole thing about, oh, he owned more than one type of gun, therefore he was a soldier. I didn't particularly like that. And the narcissistic angle was discussed a lot in ASMR Horror's video. I mean, a lot of their observations about the Zodiac's narcissistic persona were almost things that I've said word for word here on Black Box Online Radio. But in terms of something that was just some good food for thought from this video, they brought up the point about how the Zodiac appears to be a liar. Yes, okay, he's being narcissistic, he wants attention, he wants power, but it seems like what he is saying is untrue. As a case in point, the Zodiac Killer said that he was going to detonate a bomb. No one has found any evidence that this bomb actually existed. The Zodiac Killer said that he was going to go on a kill rampage, and, well, he didn't do that. The Zodiac seems like he is somebody who is not telling the truth all the time. But is the Zodiac a pure liar? What they provided was that the Zodiac seems to also be telling the truth fairly frequently. He is providing evidence and supporting reasons as to how and why he is telling the truth. As a prime example, the July 31st, 1969 letter, when he talks about how 10 shots were fired at Lake Herman Road, as well as the girl at the Blue Rock Springs shooting was wearing patterned slacks and so on. He is providing details to state that he genuinely was there and he genuinely was the killer. How about mailing in a piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt with multiple Zodiac communications and correspondences? This also suggests that the Zodiac Killer is being truthful at certain times. And if anything, and this isn't expressed in the video, but this is my own take on the subject, if anything, that added to a layer of mystery that was probably done purely unintentionally by the Zodiac Killer. He probably was not necessarily trying to create this additional layer of the mystery where sometimes he's telling the truth, sometimes he's not, and people aren't able to figure that out. And I think that the reason why I say it's unintentional is that was probably just his personality. Those were probably just his choices. I mean, he's probably just trolling, and he's saying some things that are true and some things that are false because that was probably the way he was in his daily life and so on. But I would love to know what you guys think about this. And if you would like to hear this full video in its presentation, it's on the channel ASMR Horror. And right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. Anybody can support this channel on buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. And this allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. Also, thank you for your regular and consistent support. And next we have CZ Guy. CZ Guy has also become a regular and consistent supporter, and this is the New Year's Eve show. Well, it turned into the New Year's Eve show because I was sick yesterday, but this is the New Year's Eve show, so Batman66, River Prawn Pottery, and CZ Guy, thank you so much for everything you did for Black Box Online Radio in the year of 2024. I mean, I really do mean that, and I am so glad to have been doing this show, and from supporters like you, make Black Box Online Radio keep going. And our next one comes to us from Whopper209 on buymeacoffee.com, and it says, thanks for all you do, Ned. And, thank you to you too, Whopper209. And really, I just want to say a big thank you to all the other supporters on buymeacoffee.com, as well as using the super chats and super thanks here on YouTube. Absolutely everyone who has tried to support the channel to make it bigger, as well as to just lead us into some of the expansions for Black Box Online Radio, which is going to be part of a company called Switchforge Media, which is mostly just going to be a one-man operation run by me. And that is something that I'm really looking forward to creating in 2025, which we are only one day away from. And I appeared on the Zodiac Killer channel. Yes, as a guest, but the Zodiac Killer channel that was taken away from us in 2024, that would be something from the previous year that I think a lot of us are very sad about, or we definitely did not want the Zodiac Killer channel to go away, but that channel was deleted. But in my episode, I stated that Switchforce Media was not only going to focus on Black Box Online Radio and true crime, I was also going to work behind the scenes doing producer-style activities with a cooking show and a psychology show. And the psychology channel was mostly just reviving my old YouTube channel, AstroPsych400. And that was something that I did a little bit on. I made, probably about 8 or 9 episodes in 2024 for AstroPsych400. One of them was the most popular video that was ever put out there. And it was part of a segment that was called Persuasion Classics, where I was talking about the persuasion tactics that people were using in famous media clips. But I don't necessarily know if I'm going to be continuing too much with AstroPsych400. And as far as those producer activities, life takes a lot of twists and turns. We explored some possibilities, and I don't think either one of those are going to really be the focus. The focus is going to be Black Box Online Radio, and this channel has been a true crime channel for a very long time, and that's the way that it's going to stay. And the other things that will come out with Switchforce Media will be some very simple projects, very simple pages that will be run. One of them will be called Pumpkin Photo Magazine, which is now available on Instagram. Really, it's just going to be an Instagram page that is going to focus on Halloween-related things that will mostly be operating in October. And another one is going to be called Soda Savers. I already have the page on Facebook because somebody recommended to me that even if you aren't ready to start something, save the domain, secure the domains so that you can use them in the future. And Soda Savers was something that I was planning on starting in 2011, actually, but it took a while. And right now it's mostly going to focus on soda-themed clothing and just like a fan page, memorabilia, and collecting. But there are going to be a lot of things that are going to happen with Switchforce Media, and those things are purely not done for profit. I don't even know how you would monetize something like that. If anything, it's just some fascinations that I have that are outside of the true crime world, and that's why Switchforce Media is going to have that name as opposed to just Black Box Online Radio Inc. or True Crime Talk Radio Inc. But thank you so much for listening to this episode here, and this is going to be a shorter one, it seems, because It appears that I'm unable to make it a little bit longer, but I did have some more things to discuss with you guys on the Zodiac Killer News Report. But you can always tune in next Monday in 2025 for a new episode about the Zodiac Killer. And thank you so much for listening to Black Box Online Radio. And that will be all for me now. Goodbye.